Hello everybody! Here we are for chapter 17. Now in chapter 17 we're going to talk about environmental hazards and human health. As always, let's take a look at a case study. This chapter's case study, Mercury. Mercury and its toxic effects. Now, all mercury compounds are toxic to humans and really most mammals. And unfortunately, we can get mercury directly from the atmosphere. And about 1/3 of what's in the atmosphere that you can breathe in, once again, very small amounts, but about 1/3 of it is just natural sources. Volcano eruptions, it can be from forest fires, various natural occurrences. Once again, mercury is an element, right? It's just found in the rocks and the ground, and it can be released, gets heated up, it can be vaporized. It's in the atmosphere. But about 2/3 of what's in the atmosphere is from human causes. Burning coal is one of the huge ones. As we burn coal, it releases mercury up, it vaporizes, it goes up into the atmosphere. Now, burning coal isn't the only one, but it is a big part of it. So just what's in the atmosphere, we're going to get some. But if you live near where there's a lot of industry and there's a lot of coal burning going on, you're going to wind up inhaling more mercury vapor than if you live somewhere that is not higher in industry. Just a reality. Two main human exposures. Yes, it's in the atmosphere, but usually where we get it from. Fish that are contaminated with it, and then inhaling vaporized mercury. It's very small traces. Once again, it kind of depends on where you live. You live in an area that is actually firing a lot of things, there's a lot of coal burning, you're near the coal burning plant, you're going to wind up inhaling more mercury vapor. But then again, we get it in fish, it's bioaccumulation, it gets consumed in fish, remains in them, we eat the fish. So you eat a lot of fish, can raise the mercury levels up. Now, what does mercury do? Well, there was an old saying, as mad as a hatter. Way back, hatters used to make felt by putting mercury on beaver pelt. Now they made felt for making a lot of hats. So the hatters tended to work with mercury a lot. Well, as you handle mercury, it gets absorbed through your skin and it builds up in your body and it affects your brain. It gives you neurological damage. So this is why they'd be mad as a hatter. Hatters tended to start getting more and more loopy because they were literally getting mercury poison. So mercury affects the brain, neurological things, and it can cause brain damage. So especially in younger children and or pregnant women, we really want to make sure we minimize amounts of mercury. You know, like the little sign back here, you know, fish from these waters can contain mercury. And you can't see a little fine print. A lot of times it'll say, you shouldn't eat more than this fish per month or week or whatever, and if you're pregnant or something. Anyway, all the list from it, just because we know in those particular waters, the mercury content's high. Because it's in the rocks nearby or something else is leached into it, and the mercury in the water is there particularly high. Now this chapter, once again, health hazards, etc. Chapter 17.1, this section is going to be on health hazards and risk assessment. You know, there's a hazard, well, you know, what do? I can't be paralyzed, I can't leave my house because something bad could happen, but, you know, we have to assess risks, if you will. And, you know, out there in the environment, there's a lot of risks out there in the real world, right? Now, let's talk about some that are there that we'll run into. We have biological hazards, you know, like a pathogen. You know, you could wind up getting sick by drinking bad water or something, or eaten by a shark, right? Biological, anyway. Chemical hazards, like the mercury, or I could breathe in certain chemicals, or have chemicals injected into me, and somebody using drugs. These are hazards, right? They're just natural hazards, earthquakes, if you will. I trip over a log, a tree falls down, what have you. Cultural hazards, specifically because of your the culture you actually live in. We drive a lot in the United States. Therefore, a car accident becomes a cultural hazard, where if I live somewhere where we don't drive, a car crash isn't really a cultural hazard. And then you have lifestyle choices. The lifestyle you choose to live can have various hazards with it, depending on, what you're wanting to do. I guess you talk about, I'm going to be an extreme adventurer. I'm going to bungee jump and rock climb. Well, obviously you're taking on more risk than somebody who decides to be a computer programmer. Not that a computer programmer can't go out and have fun, but, this is what I do for a living, is climb rocks versus program. One's just inherently more risky than the other. So let's talk about risk in general. So when we talk about risk, we just mean the probability of suffering harm from a particular hazard. And we tend to express this as a ratio or a percentage. Now, there could be probability in anything. If I get in my car and drive, well, I could have a risk of a car accident, right? And we try and think, well, what are they? What is it? 20%, 10% chance, 3% chance. And some of the things we look at and then we evaluate, well, am I going to do it or not? There's a 99% chance of safety, if you will, or there's only 1% chance of danger. And we tend to go ahead with it. You get a surgery and they tell you, hey, these are all the things that could happen. It's unusual, but we just have to know the risk. And then we make what we call a risk assessment. This is where we use statistical methods to estimate the harm. If you get the eye surgery, there's a 1 in 10,000 chance you could go blind. And the old thing is, well, doctor, how many of these surgeries have you done? I've done 9,999 with no problems. Well, once again, a 1 in 10,000 chance, very, very low. A 1 in a million chance, very, very low. But we assess risk. And then we take risk management, deciding whether or how to reduce a particular risk. Let's take a look at a chart and I'll show you a little bit more of what we're talking about. We identify the hazard, all right? Crashing in a car. If you drive a car, you could crash. And we look at it, over the data, actually there wound up being a lot of people dying in car crashes. So how likely is the event? We kind of look at the numbers and say, okay, over a lifetime, the odds of you being in a crash are almost 100%. Very few people go their entire life without being in a crash of some kind. Not that they're always really bad, but and then consequence of the risk. What's the likely damage? And if you're in a car risk, getting hurt in some shape, form, or what, even if it's just a bruise on your head or a cut or a broken arm or limb, what's the thing? And that's our risk assessment. If I do this, what is the possible hazard? How likely is it to happen? And what's the likely damage? Am I going to do it? Risk management. A lot of times this is where government can come along and or industry, if you will, and help us out, if you will, like with a car. Comparative risk analysis, what's the hazard? Car crash. Well, you could die or get seriously injured. How does it compare with other risks? Well, if you're riding a bike, other things, can be pretty great. How much should it be reduced? And can we? We go, you know what? Hey, we could put seat belts on. If we put on a seat belt, it would keep the people being thrown around. As we look at it, most people were hurt, not just by the crash itself, but by the secondary impact, that you got thrown and hit something else, or literally even thrown out of the car and then hit, etc. So how will the risk be reduced? So it's, once again, should it be reduced? Can we? Ooh, yes, we could. We could do this. How will it be? This takes it down by 50%. This will make 75% of it. Is it worth it? And then how much money should be spent? And this is where we go. In cars over the years, they started with, they had safety glass, they were strong, the idea. Then we realized we had to put in safety belts. Most cars now have airbags put in them. Once again, in the United States, all of them do, but not everywhere in the world does. But we add more safety things and we begin to evaluate what to do it. There's the risk assessment, and then there's risk management. What can we do to minimize the potential risk? Even if you want to go rock climbing, well, there's a risk of falling, so you do a whole lot of things to manage it. And if you go somewhere, they require that you do this or that, or that you have a belayer, etc. But we're using ropes, we're tying things on. We're doing what we can to minimize the risk when we know the risk is there. Let's talk about some of those ones that we mentioned, like biological hazards. They're just out in the real world, they're biological hazards, like pathogens, an organism that can cause disease. Once again, our water gets treated because we know there's a hazard if you drink water straight from the stream, the lake, the aquifer, etc. You could get a pathogen. So we treat our water. Once again, what's the risk? Really high if it's not treated that you're going to get sick. So what's the cost? It's really not all that expensive to treat it, so we do, making the water safe when we go out there or others. We have chemical risk, harmful chemicals in the air, the water, soil, our food. And if you live somewhere where there's more air pollution, you have a higher risk of breathing in chemicals and getting lung cancer or something else. If you live in an area where the water has more mercury in it, the odds of you getting mercury poisoning much higher, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And some of these are, you choose to smoke. Well, you're inhaling chemicals in. But anyway, chemical. There's just natural hazards, right? There could be a forest fire and it could burn my house down. There could be an earthquake. Now here in Florida, we're not really worried about earthquakes, but depending on where you live, an earthquake could be a hazard, and you choose, we're gonna move there. It's earthquake prone. Do I wanna live there? It's a choice we make. It comes into that cultural one again. It's part of the culture here. If you're in San Francisco, earthquakes are part of the culture. Volcanic eruptions, natural. Do we live near a volcano? Are there any steps we need to put in place in case we do? When I lived in Nepal, earthquakes were a reality and we were prepared. Here in Florida, natural is going to be hurricanes. And we have our little hurricane preparedness kit. It's not so much a kit, but a little area in our closet where we keep some water. We have a little wind-up flashlight and radio. We keep some canned goods around. And, once again, just in case the power's out, we lose everything, we have the bare necessities. We just plan for some of these natural events, if you will. And I kind of mentioned cultural hazards. Once again, if you live in San Francisco, then earthquakes are a cultural hazard. We live in Florida, and hurricanes are a cultural hazard. It's part of what's here. Can be working conditions. If you work in a certain area, and once again, not everybody's in the United States. In other countries, they may have unsafe working conditions, and it's something you just have to sort of accept. If I want to work there are these risks and hazards. Let's say I'm going to work in a steel mill. Well, we're using molten steel, and there are particular hazards with that job as opposed to somewhere else. Criminal assault. If I happen to live in a town that has high crime, well, it's a cultural hazard where I happen to live. And even poverty really can be a cultural hazard. Growing up in poverty, people tend to remain in poverty. Not always. You definitely can get out. Education is one of the best ways to do that. Get an education and you get a better job and pull yourself out of the poverty cycle. But these are just possible cultural hazards. And once again, not everybody's in America. Some people grow up in countries that are largely poor, and getting out of that cycle can be immensely difficult. And they're just hazards that come with being poor. If you can't afford enough food, you can't buy some of the safety things, you can't get safe water where you are, just a difficulty. And then we have lifestyle choices, right? We all make certain choices. People choose to smoke. If you choose to smoke, you're choosing to take chemicals that are known to dramatically increase your chances of lung cancer, emphysema, all sorts of problems. People make poor food choices. We know that we should eat more fresh vegetables, fresh fruits, grains, small amounts of meats and sweets and fats. But some people choose to eat very high fatty diets, large amounts of red meat, too much sweets, and this causes problems within their body, whether it's heart problems, breathing problems, just the inability to really be able to be active because you eat too much. Once again, poor food choices, and even something like having unsafe sex. You go out there and you're having unsafe, unprotected sex, well, the odds of you getting an STD are way higher than somebody who's only with one partner for life, right? The odds of you getting an STD are virtually nil, or having protected in some shape, form, or fashion. Once again, just lifestyle choices. And all of these come with a particular risk, and we have to assess that risk and say, are there ways to manage it? Well, that kicks us off for section 1. Come back next time and we will talk specifically just about biological hazards. Take care, guys. We'll see you next time.